Hi, welcome everyone to another episode of Let's Talk Special Economic Zones. I'm your host, Ainsley Brown. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the paradox of a policy shift towards more non-fiscal incentives versus fiscal incentives within special economic zones. So, as I usually do, I go in and define what special economic zones are. So, it doesn't matter what you call them, free zones, special economic zones, free trade zones, enterprise zones. There's a variety of names. It's the same thing. It's basically a geographic space where special rules, particularly fiscal incentives, apply, encouraging investors to come and invest in that area, that physical geographic space. That's what a special economic zone is. Now, when it comes to defining what fiscal. So there are three different types of incentives: fiscal, non-fiscal, and financial. Financial is, as the name says, financial. That's money being given up by a government to incentivize someone to come and do an investment. In terms of fiscal, those are tax breaks. Those are either, customs duties being foregone, or a reduction in corporate income tax rate, or reduction in value added tax, stamp duty, you name it. Now, a non fiscal incentive is basically processes and the speed or an ease of doing business. This, in essence, I like to call this governance as a service. That's what that is, governance as a service. Um, and this is where the paradox comes in, because while economy and zones are scattered throughout the world, it's not just a developing world thing, but the developing world tends to focus on fiscal incentives to incentivize people, and those fiscal incentives are generally designed to make up for some deficit or compensate for some deficit that is within the regular economy. And in fact, that is tends to be what the zones are. The zones are supposed to be representation of the country at its best, at its most efficient. This is why um, the fiscal incentives are then geared to compensate for those deficiencies. But that's the paradox, because if you're telling countries, as unfortunately or fortunately, depends on how you look at it, with the OECD, the BEPS framework, inclusive framework, where you have the global minimum of 15% corporate income tax. You're in essence on an effective rate of corporate income tax, because it also accounts for other, tax credits and so forth that may lower an effective rate, right? So the challenge is, how is it that you compensate for the deficiencies that you have in the first place? That's why you put in the non-fiscal incentives, or fiscal incentives in the first place. So to shift the fiscal incentives, you're given something in part that you do not have, right? You do not have, because you're trying to make up for deficiencies in your economy. Like if you look at the US, for example, has a very successful zone program, and they only offer one fiscal incentive, and that is customs duties being postponed, so to speak, until the next decision is taken, whether to sell the product in the US. And at that time, then duties may apply, or export it out. Then US duties don't apply, but duties may apply when it gets to its final destination. You know, they are able to present a lot of non-fiscal incentives, because one, they have a large market, access to a large consumer market. That's a non-fiscal incentive. They have a strong legal system, right? Commercial courts that people can go and resolve their issues, or challenges that they face in business. So these things the U.S. has, which are part of their regular economy, not and their zone program benefits from it. So In contemplating a shift towards more non-fiscal, governments will have to really consider a lot of things. Um, that have to, when designing their zone program, ensure that they can deliver those non-fiscal incentives. So, for example, they you wouldn't be able to do a if you have frequent challenge has been customs, for example. You'd have to literally design a special customs regime for your zones, which has to be multiple times faster and more efficient than the regular if you're going to present that as a non-fiscal incentives. There's also um, other non-fiscal. You could be having work permits, for example, that the speed at which that goes is multiple times of what happens in the domestic territory. Of course, these zones are incubators for policy change. So eventually, the objective should be that you roll out